What family secret was finally spilled in your family? My great-grandmother had a son out of wedlock before she met my great-grandfather. No one knew until my wife did a grave search on her grave to see if the unmarked second body was my great-grandfather. Turned out to be a 2-year-old boy no one knew she had. She got knocked up by some guy who split shortly after the kid was born. The kid ended up dying of I forget what. Something we have a vax for now, measles or whatever. So she just pretended the kid never existed and started over with my great-grandfather. The best part is, we still don't know where they planted my great-grandfather's body. I was always told that my mother's father had died in the war. After my mother died, my cousins found out that our grandfather was actually alive and had divorced my grandmother when my mum was young. My grandmother, being a good Irish Catholic, told the nuns at the school that she was a widow because the church wouldn't let a divorced woman's kids go to Catholic school. My grandfather had remarried and had a whole other set of kids and grandchildren. My cousins tried to meet him, but he wasn't interested. Just found out my missing paternal grandfather was murdered back in the 80s. He was a scumbag, but I'd occasionally try to find out about him because I knew my dad needed closure. He'd been chased out of town by the mafia for running some fraud scheme. I thought it might have to do with that, but it turns out he just pissed off some guy at a bar and took one too many bricks to the head. FYI, it did not give my dad closure. He just graduated to feeling family shame. We're working on it. My brother and his ex-wife are actually first cousins. They were together for a few years and had my niece back in 2010. They divorced by 2012. My sister is an absolute asshole and spilled it to my niece that her parents are cousins. My sister should have waited until her parents had that conversation with her, or at least till my niece was older. I found out about their relationship when I was about 8-9 years old. As a child, the concept blew my mind, but as an adult this is weird and gross, lol. So my Uncle Frankie is actually my dad. And no, my mum never cheated. The father I grew up with was infertile and passed away when I was 14. At age 22, my brother wanted to go on Ancestry and find out where he's from. At this point, my mum is sweating, stressing so bad, and my brother and I were like. But then she finally broke the news that my dad's best friend Frankie donated his sperm for the cause. Me and my bro have two different donors as well. So not the same dad. Wild, right? My dad probably might not be my dad. It slipped out when I was 28 years old. A lot made sense after that though, and it helped me because I finally understood why his family treated me so poorly. There was nothing at all wrong with me, and it wasn't my fault. They were awful people all along for treating a child that way. I wouldn't want people like that in my life anyway, so now I'm all good. And he was my dad. Maybe not by blood, but definitely with his whole heart and soul. We found out after my grandpa died that he had another kid with a woman he met before my grandma. If he ever knew he had a kid. The offspring showed up on one of those ancestry gene websites and said he was open to meeting family. So some of the older cousins went out hunting with him. All this was spilled to me at my cousin's wedding 2 years ago. And I guess people in the family had known for a few years. My parents never told me, and they still don't know that I know. 2 weeks ago I found out that my last name is really not my last name. Apparently my great-great-grandfather remarried and took his second wife's last name. No idea why. Only thing I can think of is due to status or wealth. Or maybe he was a closet feminist. It was before social security cards. And after a certain amount of time I was told it was okay to just roll W it. Not sure how or why that works. But that is what I was told by me elders. My uncle was a cop, my father was a mid-level drug kingpin. He basically ran the marijuana psychedelics trade in a small city. When I was a kid my uncle died in the line of duty. There was a big funeral and everything. Turns out he wasn't killed in the line of duty. The cops found out that my father was paying him for cop information. When he was accused, my uncle ate a gun in his squad car in a parking lot. I found out 30 years later. My grandma always told a wonderful, Romantic family legend. Her grandma was a beautiful teenage peasant girl in Europe. A member of the royal family saw her as he was passing by. He instantly fell in love, got married, was disowned by his family for marrying a peasant, died tragically. An amazing tale. Alas, those bastards at 23M have shown that the story is 100% genetically impossible. Grandma lied a lot, it seems. When my nanny dad's mum died, it turned out she had a baby at 16 and he died at 1 year and 1 day old. Also found out great granny got tired of waiting for her husband to come back after he abandoned her and the kids, so she stepped out on the regular. Your husband leaves and makes a new family. We confirmed he had 2 wives, then has the balls to go back to her like he's on vacation. She was like, fuck that. My great aunt was a nurse supervisor at the mental hospital in the 1920s. She fell in love with a guy who was being evaluated for a murder trial. She helped him escape and they went to Florida, but the police caught up with them. My aunt got off easy, but he got the electric chair. I found all this in a newspaper archives while working on family history. Showed it to my mum and she admitted it was all true. That my parents had to get married. They always told us they got married in 1961. But it was 1962. 3 months before my sister was born. What's amusing is that my father was an accountant who was insanely fast with math. Whenever he was asked how many years they'd been married, he'd be off by 1. My mother would correct him through clenched teeth, and then my father would nod and agree. My brother was on a TV show called Top Cops. Real-life police stories. Anyway, after it aired, he got a phone call from a woman in California. We are Canadian, who recognized our unusual family name. She told him that she was the illegitimate daughter of my grandfather on my dad's side. News to us. Anyway, my dad had already passed, as did his parents. But it was an interesting story. My sweet, adorable grandpa did a year in San Quentin for bank robbery in 1930. I have an aunt who is married to a retired police detective, and she has access to databases us mere mortals don't. She discovered grandpa was in San Quentin, and she could not locate him on the 1930 census. I'm 100% sure my grandmother never knew, because she never would have let him forget it if she did. My parents were married 28 years. Each had one affair very early in the marriage. Then things settled down. A few years after my father died, my mother met and married a man that my father's aunt recognized a new husband as the man she had the affair with so many years prior. The aunt spilled the beans and fractured the entire family. Drama, drama, drama. My grandmother's biological mum was actually who she thought was her sister until she was an adult. She's now 97 and never knew her actual dad and thought her biological grandparents were her parents. Kind of confusing, but it was the 1920s. And they were English, and the guy she got pregnant by was Irish. I guess taboo back then. Weird. I have a cousin I never met until I was 25. Never knew of his existence until maybe the year before. My aunt's ex, I guess, just took him across the country, and it used to make her out to be a bad person, I guess, to where he didn't want to visit. I still don't know the details, but she talks to him now. That's all that matters. I'm one of 4 kids. My entire life. We were told that my sisters shared a father. I was an affair baby. And my younger brother was my mother's second husband's kid. Found out not all that long ago that my sisters do not, in fact, share a father, and the younger of my 2 older sisters is an affair baby, just like me. My younger brother told me our dad got on dating websites talking to men and women in 2003, and continued to do so all the way until he left in 2017. Apparently our mum had some friends over when he was living with her during COVID. She shouted it to God and everyone as she should, forgetting that her kid was right there. My great-grandmother wasn't actually Mexican, but rather was adopted by a Mexican family from a Chinese family who was being kicked out of Mexico when railroad construction was over. She always had more typically Asian features. I only spoke Spanish, and it was questioned. 23andMe is a hell of a thing. In the 1970s, a dead girl was found on my grandpa's property. Everyone, including the local police, just assumed she was in with a bad crowd and murdered by drug dealers. In the 90s, some of his grandkids came forward about all the molestation. After that, people started to realize Grandpa probably killed that girl. My dad was into finding out about family history, so I began digging around. He always was told his mother died of blood poisoning while I got the death certificate, and she died from a botched abortion in the 1920s. I didn't tell him because he would have been so sad. She died when he was 3-4 years old. Awful. My mother is kid 7 of 10. My aunt Kidfa, who was born in 1945, did her DNA and found out that she has a different father from everyone else. She was devastated. There was always rumor that there was an affair, but nobody talked about it. She has so many questions, but nobody's alive to answer her. My great aunt was a prostitute. Her husband, my great uncle, was a John. I guess this wasn't super shocking to the older generation or her siblings, but to my age group, we just knew her as a sweet old lady and my uncle as a gruff but kind-hearted old man. So that was sort of a strange thought. My mum was having an affair with a schizophrenic dude she met in a bar, got pregnant and just let her husband believe I was his my whole life. When she was sick in the hospital and looped out drugs, she started mumbling on about my dad not being my real dad. To 3 and test later and secrets out.